or why are we all here? It kind of goes like this. My family's been on the coast here for, I think, 7 generations now in the county, and I'm the youngest of the 4th generation. My name is Chuck Ross. Unless you actually knew me way back then, and some of you know that I'm actually Choppy. That was what I was called my whole life, and that's it. If you knew me by that name, feel free. It's kind of cool, actually. Can't take a name like that out into the grown-up world, though. You know, you just have to explain it all the time. Yeah. Grew up here. So I was born in Willits. We lived in Willits, but we had the old hotel, the old lumber company hotel here in town, and 68 bedrooms at that time. And we spent weekends and summer vacations, and summers over here and stuff like that. And when my father was killed, we just moved over here. So lived here from then on. About my first 20 years. After a brief and unimpressive academic career, I came back and worked in the woods for a while, bucking logs out on the Elk Creek, and found the sawmills more of my liking, and so I did that for a couple of years actually, and then started getting my pilot's license, and you know, grew up in the world. I've never lived here again, but I've maintained an abiding interest in this area, and a pretty darn good long-term memory. So I just remember a lot of conversations I had 60, 70 years ago. If you don't know where that is, we'll try to explain. Anyway, we're going to just take a little walk through. I did Cuffey's Cove last night and the earliest history there. We just recap them just a little bit today and then get on. So we went from about 1852, the opening up of this coast to Europeans, and ended in about 1916. And today we'll just start about 1916, big event happening. So I got a hot link down here somewhere where the old mill was. Yes, it is. There it is. All right. So we talked about this stuff last night, and I kind of smile when I consider Europeans in Cuffey's Cove. Francisco Faria was from the Azores. I'm not sure if that's considered part of Europe. And Nat Smith was from Africa, and that's not part of Europe. So, but there was through English-speaking people, I guess, in Cuffey's Cove area. Yeah, Francisco Faria, Nat Smith, the Greenwood brothers came in about the same year. They came just as early as Smith and Faria. James Kenny, Michael Donahue, very Irish town that was. I'm going to have to credit James Kenny with being the founder of Cuffey's Cove. Francisco Faria owned his property for about a year and a half. James Kenny bought it and laid out of town. It looked just like it did before he arrived. When Faria left, it looked just like like he'd never been there. So the town really got to go to James Kenny. And by the way, everybody spells it with K-E-N-N-E-Y. His tombstone is K-E-N-N-Y, and the legal papers he signed spelled like this. I chose to do that. Osro Cliff brought about big change by settling about 5 miles southeast of here on top of the ridge. And as soon as he got established, he sent for his herd of cattle down in Marin County, and Lorenzo E. White, a real prosperous businessman and entrepreneur, drove them up here. White liked what he saw, the timber, and he homesteaded there himself in 1858. I just fairly recently learned that. Before the big steam industries came to town, including the railroad, Cuffey's Cove would have fit right into the 17th century. It was just this quaint little sort of an agricultural town, but they did ship out shingles and railroad ties. We'll talk about that just a little bit. Mendocino Railroad was incorporated in 1875, and the following year they brought the first locomotive here. And that locomotive still lies in Greenwood Creek. It's scattered down the creek. Fred Helmke built a sawmill about 2 miles up Greenwood Creek, just right on bedrock on the south side of the creek. Where Cameron Road comes into the Greenwood Philo Road, it's kind of like right straight down the hill from there is where it was. And that started changing things. It went through multiple ownership. Charlie Crocker and Leland Stanford owned it for a little while. But L.E. White bought it by about 1884. And I'm not sure everybody in town knew that, I mean, at the time. He arrives on the scene. He's big in business in Salmon Creek, Whitesboro, and at Rollerville, Point Arena. very prosperous lumber enterprises going on there, and he came here because he had beheld the old growth redwood from one end of Elk Creek to the other, and it was unclaimed, and he wasn't the sort of person to let that go unclaimed. He built Greenwood, built his mill here, built the town of Greenwood. It drained the workforce away from Cuffey's Cove, and then the merchants of town kind of followed down here, and Cuffey's Cove just withered on the vine, and Greenwood grew. And yeah, it is Greenwood. It's the Elk Post Office, Greenwood, California, except on the new post office it says Elk Post Office. Need to talk to him about that. The town was and always has been Greenwood. Things changed quite a lot when Ellie White died in 1896, and he had a son, kind of the Fredo of the family. Wasn't the most capable guy, very troubled man, I think. And to protect him, he reincorporated everything under one umbrella and left everything to his son. There was a daughter, got snubbed in the will, and then Will White, the son, died only 2 years later. Left everything to his widow. His widow hired an attorney in San Francisco. They prevailed in court, and she married her attorney, and that was Frank C. Drew. It's even better than that. It's just too long a story to tell. But so she became Helen P. Drew, and Frank C. Drew ran the company, and that was a big change for them. My grandfather, John Ross Jr., so he's the John Ross II of six, anyway, and counting. He came down here in 1899, ran the company for a couple of years, and it wasn't a good fit, and he went back and ran the Mendocino Lumber Company for 22 years. So that was the beginning of my association, my family's association with it. Frank C. Drew and Helen P. Drew, now they're getting old, and they have run the company, and so about 1916, Frank Drew is 55 years old, doesn't look to be in real good health. He's just gone through a range war here, the infamous Alder Creek Range War, and he's probably getting about ready to retire. So they decided to put the company up for sale and enjoy the rest of their lives in San Francisco. They incorporated for the first time everything under a single corporation. 83,000 acres of timberland. Much of it was already logged over, of course, by this time, but most of Elk Creek had been logged by this time. But still, that's 123 square miles. That's a big hunk of property. There was actually more. This was all from one map, so there was more. About 30 miles of mainline railroad. There's probably over time, maybe another 30 or 40 miles of little sidings built up a gulch to log it out, and then they pull the rails up and move the next one. There's about 30 miles of mainline railroad, and in the inventory at the time, they had 2 Shea locomotives, this little HK port called the Dinky right here in the yard, and at the time they had 3 steam schooners, the Alcatraz, the Helen P. Drew, and the White Sparrow. And by the way, I just found the log of the White Sparrow this morning. I can't touch it without a hazmat gear, but I found it. There was the sawmill, a bark mill. Took dry bark of tan oak trees, ground it, and extracted the tannins for leather works in San Francisco. Big commercial product at the time. And saloon, hotel, about 40 company houses all rented out to their workers. My grandpa said they brought in one payroll and used it over and over and over. Just the company store, company housing, and all that stuff. He didn't think it was a very good way to do business, but in the early days, he didn't have the power to change that. There was company ranch. I count actually 3 good company ranches, but they were all contiguous property and all single owner. But all 3 of these would have been a good standalone ranch property. So this is what's offered for sale. At the time, the Goodyear family, the tire rubber people, big in the lumber business, mostly up in the Northeast and around the Great Lakes. But they had a yellow pine operation and a tung oil operation in Mississippi, Picayune, Mississippi, and this man was running it, Lamont Rollins. Very capable man. He was a 2-time gubernatorial appointee to commissions in Mississippi and 1 time appointed to a commission by President Hoover. a man who could get things done. He was also president of the Christian Science Church in his spare time, and ran this company. So they're going to buy this company. He's going to run this one and the one in Picayune, Mississippi. Whatever transportation was like in 1916, he was going to do both. $3.5 million was agreed upon price, and Goodyear decided to leverage that. It was mostly financed through the Chicago bond market, and that will prove to be an interesting choice here. And I think it was too much money to pay for the company as it stood at the time, but it was a stone bargain on the real estate. You imagine buying 83,000 acres for $86 million, about $1,000 an acre. Mill was 25 years old by this time. They did a big retrofit, but it was sound. It was a really well-built mill. The big thing they did, and for docents, this is a good thing to know, they put a big boiler on the east side of the mill, on the right-hand side of the big, tall stack, and eventually tore down the two shorter stacks that were on the west side of the mill. 1916 is that change, so you can date photographs from that. They built the company office, and that's a visitor center we're going down to after we're done here. They built that. They built 4 executive houses up at the north end of town, and so we're just going to take a walk through the company's their assets, and we're going to look from White through Goodyear to the end. So it goes like this. Here's the ship sale owned over time. Before he's ever set a board on the ground to build his mill, he ordered 4 ships to be constructed in San Francisco. So the Greenwood and the Whitesboro were delivered in 1886. Following year, they added the Alcatraz and the Alcazar. These are all about 250-ton steam schooners. They actually could sail. They could get some propulsion from sail, but they had tea kettle down there in the engine room. 1904, they added the Helen P. Drew. Any moment now. All right, there we go. At 306 tons, she was a little bit bigger than the other boats, so Commodore Gunderson transferred his flag to the Drew, and she's the last one. There may be as much as a plank left of that boat. In 1907, they sold the Greenwood, and then the Alcazar was wrecked up at Shelter Cove. So they're down to 3 ships. 1917, they sold the Whitesboro, and the Alcatraz was wrecked. So a couple of bad years there, but 10 relatively good years in between. They're down to 1 ship now. And did I mention that the Alcatraz was wrecked? It's the one and only shipwreck I know of at Greenwood. I've documented 9 at Cuffey Cove, only this one here at Greenwood. What happened was, the wharf over there at far side, on the far side of that rock, long after dark, Captain Arthur Krause left the moorings, sailed outboard of Casket Rock, the steep one out there again, and made for Point Arena and steamed straight into the Mile Rock. Just caved in the bow of the ship, and she started sinking on the even keel. They abandoned ship. During the night, she drifted in hard up against the beach. Eventually, it would break up against the beach. There's maybe pieces scattered along in the sand there and stuff like that, but I've never found any trace of it. Anyway, the company went out the next morning. They threw all the lumber overboard, and the crew picked it up out of the surf and haystacked it there on the beach. And this photograph actually shows a long boat going around the stern of the Alcatraz. That was a crew going out to salvage a shipment of butter from the Greenwood Creamery bound for San Francisco. And that was put aboard the Helen P. Drew and completed its journey. Ships of the Redwood Coast got the date wrong, but it was May 2nd, 1917. Well, now they got 1 ship. This is the time of other flags calling at Greenwood. I have a picture of the steam schooner Casper under the wire here at Greenwood. And so along about 1920 or so, they bought the Phoenix, which is a ship with quite a history of its own. It burned to the waterline twice before this picture was taken. Its boiler explosion, only 2 people survived. That was right offshore here. And the wreck turned over and drifted south, and it was finally taken to go about 100 miles off Monterey, towed upside down in San Francisco Bay and repaired. Show you what a good hull is worth. All right, the railroad. This is the first locomotive on the scene. And it's got kind of an interesting story. It looks like a Monopoly engine, doesn't it? It's a cute little bucket, but this was, the Mendocino Railroad incorporated in 1875. They had no locomotive. They were using horses to pull carts, shingles, and whatnot down out of Laurel Gulch. A man named West Evans ordered this locomotive in 1876. He was one of the principals in the Mendocino Railroad, but he was the tie merchant who sold the Central Pacific Railroad every tie from the ferry slips at Oakland to Promontory, Utah. He donated the laurelwood tie into which the golden spike was driven. It's right on the plaque on that tie. West Evans, and all but forgotten by history. So he ordered this locomotive in early 1876, and by the time it was rolled out the doors there at Broad Street, Philadelphia, he was bankrupt. Bankrupt is not the same thing as being broke or poor, but he did not take delivery of this locomotive. It was delivered to L.E. White and offloaded off ship at Cuffey's Cove. L.E. White wasn't doing business at Cuffey's Cove. L.E. White wasn't at Cuffey's Cove. He was at Whitesboro. He was at Rollerville. Big mystery why he brought that locomotive to Cuffey's Cove. And I would love to know. Maybe he leased it to the railroad. Maybe he was a part owner of the railroad by this time. I don't know. Love to know the story. Also love to know who those people are. That looks like a varnish. And that, by the way, that picture was taken right out here in the field, about 100 yards from where he was dead. Yeah.
What's the star symbol?
Oh, it'll become clear when I show the rest of the slides, but there's a number plate on the smoke box door on these old steam locomotives, and the rest of them had numbers. This one has a star. So it was the one and only when it was ordered. You know, if you order them with what's called a road number, they'll put that on the number plate. That locomotive still lies in Greenwood Creek. I have a piece of it. I own a piece of the one of the driver wheels, and picked it out when we owned the property. Actually, not exactly. Kurt Berry did, and his son gave it to me. Anyway, that some point after 1909, that toppled into Greenwood Creek. It escaped the notice of the newspaper. There's no mention of it or anything like that. Don't know what happened, and it's still in the creek today. In fact, as soon as she takes a picture, I'll show you. There we go. That's the boiler in Greenwood Creek as of a few years ago. Laying on its right side, and we're looking forward along this firebox down there in the boiler. There's pieces of it all up and down the creek up there. The second locomotive on the scene was the Sausalito. That's kind of an interesting story too. It was ordered by the North Pacific Coast Railroad to run between Sausalito and Cazadero, all up western Sonoma County. And they didn't like it. It didn't work out well for them. So after only 2 years, they took it down to Union Iron Works in San Francisco and converted it from 2 pilot wheels up front and 6 drivers to 4 pilot wheels and 4 drivers, 4-4-0 configuration in the white classification system. And they took it to Salmon Creek, operated there for a little while, and then brought it here to, and I think it was probably offloaded at Greenwood rather than Cuffey's Cove. It had been at Salmon Creek for a while. It soldiered on, and oh, by the way, you see the steam back there at the back. That's the other locomotive. Oh, I didn't mention that. The other locomotive was named the Tycoon. You can read it written above there. West Evans was a railroad tycoon. This was a little play on his name. It's the Tycoon. Cute, huh? The Sausalito was always a Sausalito, and that was how it was spelled with a C on the builder's papers. I have the builder's papers, and it was road number 1. So that now you see that. And yeah, it has a helper there at the back. The Tycoon is going to help it up out of Elk Creek. We were very excited about this photograph one day. We noticed that there's a reflection in the headlight lens, in the reflector. Got a picture of the photographer standing there taking a picture. No, it was a flame holder. That's a carbide lamp. Uses carbide to make acetylene gas to make a lamp. That was just a flame holder. Disappointed. That locomotive is said to have toppled into the creek, maybe Alder Creek, and should still be there. It's got a very accurate description of where it is supposed to be. I walked past there twice and couldn't find it. I'll find it. I'll find that gadget. All right, they also had this porter down at Rollerville. I don't know if it was ever at Greenwood or not, but it was Ellie White. And the interesting story about this one is that it survived the wartime scrap drive. It was on public display in Southern California in 1960. Now, I've had a conversation with the world's leading authority on H.K. Porter locomotives, and he says, I lost it there. I don't know where it is now, but it could be in somebody's barn in San Bernardino. You know, I would love to be able to find that. All right, what else did we have? We had the famous Dinky. This is Porter number 258. It was the yard engine here at Elk, and it's been referred to by rail fans as aesthetically challenged. it's beat out, folks. One day, though, there was a long lumber tramway went from the mill up to the yard, and one day it was hauling carts of lumber up that frosty morning, lost traction, slipped back. The crew bailed out, and it ran down that tramway and crashed into the mill. It was running again within a week or so. A hard life, though. You notice the hospital house over there in the upper corner, and the Methodist church with the steeple back on the cypress head going up to Donahue's. What I find interesting about this is June 1940, some rail fans and some steam fans from the Bay Area came up and got permission to fire it up, and they ran it down to end of track, which was then cut at Highway 1 down here by Boonville Avenue, and back up. And I saw a picture of it that day, and steam shooting out every seam on the thing. It was just leaking. But this day, my grandfather, John S. Ross, signed over the last of the scrap to the Japanese buyers. This is June 1940. We got it all back to Pearl Harbor, they said. He's walking away there in the background. 54 years in the I'm slipping back into my other life here. 54 years in the lumber business, and that was his final act. What else they had? In 1903, they started buying, because they had a lot of steep and crooked trackage, they started buying these geared locomotives. They handled that stuff much better than those rod engines that are. So this was a Shay, a 37-ton Shay, and it arrived on scene numbered 139. There's a few pictures of it with that number. Don't any idea why that number was on it. And it was initially lettered Campbell after the judge who awarded the whole shebang to Helen, to daughter Helen. And then Frank Drew figured out who his real boss was and renamed it to Helen P. Drew. It was said to be numbered 1 for a while. There's a couple of pictures that do seem to show that. But eventually it was wrecked and rebuilt, and it was road number 5 for the rest of its life. That is at the Salsig company store. Yesterday I showed Salsig postmark. They had a post office there and at Manzanita. The gentleman leaning against the headlight, I believe, is Thomas P. Smythe, the engineer who laid out the whole railroad about a year before he died. Following year, they bought its twin, the 2-spot, the Frank C. Drew, and that's my grandpa standing there on the running board, and proof standing there. So if you go out here to the substation on Boonville Avenue and cross the road, there's that road going down to the creek. Where you arrive at this railroad level, you'd be right exactly where you understanding. There's a switch, 2 switches right there, yes.
Might mention that there's a nicely restored shade over in Willettsmode Tower.
Oh, that's right, there is, yeah. They're an interesting locomotive because the cylinders run up and down on the starboard side of them, and they run the wheels through a drive shaft, telescoping drive shaft on that side. By the way, I think I may have seen a locomotive wheel on that beach this morning. I've got a picture. I haven't had a good tight look at it, but there may be one exposed. The locomotive shop was over on the bluff, and they just used to roll stuff off the cliff just to watch it go. So, by 1911, they had this one down at Rollerville. Kind of an interesting little locomotive. It was the ex-Pajaro Valley number 1, so I think it might have been numbered 1, but I'm just not sure. And that picture was taken right across the Lighthouse Road, right on our brother's property. That's where that picture was taken. 1917, they bought their last locomotive, and this was the big one, the 50-ton Shay, the 4-spot. And at 50 tons, it was a little heavy for this lightweight rail. It turned the rails over from time to time and fell off the bridge upside down in the gulch a couple of times. But they were tough machines. Yeah, it's right across the road here in the yard, 1940. They had some speeders on the track, and that's the famous Winton. Everybody knows about that one. I love that they left the steering wheel on it. But if you know those old cars, there was probably a spark advance and a choke on the steering column, and rather than take all that stuff off, they just left it there. Probably let people steer it.
Are those deer on the
Yes, got a little hunting trip there. I think there's maybe 2 deer. And, and where that picture is, that rail bed isn't even there anymore. Right past the Elk Cove Inn is exactly where this picture was taken, but when they made that highway, that piece of rail bed was gone. You can still see a cut where it went across into it, but yeah, you couldn't stand there anymore. There's no place there. They also had a Oldsmobile, not a 1909 Oldsmobile. This is out of Camp 11 on Alder Creek, and very similar rig. Take a look at those wheels. We don't know what happened to these two things, but I found that wheel on the beach a few years back, and it's either from that or some lightweight piece of gear, fairly standard little lightweight wheel. But I also found Shay driver wheels that you could tell a Shay locomotive wheels with a bevel gear all the way around the wheel. Bunch of those down on that beach. This is some good years for this company, some good years for this town. A little play on the words because it was Goodyear Lumber Company, but they did have some good years here, folks. There are 3 parallel tributaries to Alder Creek off the north side of the Adams Ridge. There's John Creek, Tin Can Creek, and Nye Creek. And they're north-facing canyons in the edge of the fog belt, rail infested with redwood. I mean, you can't weed whack the redwood down out there. It just grows thick and fast, and they made a lot of money just on those 3 creeks. This is Camp 11 out on Alder Creek. We're looking north, or looking south, I mean. So it's downstream about 8 miles is the highway, and upstream that way about 10 miles or so is Mountain View Road. Big camp, big camp. There were several hundred people out there. They had a school and teachers. There were dances out there on weekends. Young ladies would come in from Point Arena to go to these dances. The big building is the cookhouse, and the building to the left of it was the company store and the woods boss's office. Later on in that little clear spot over on the right, they built a big locomotive shop. And my son and I walked through that railroad cut just a couple of years ago. It's just a nice, pleasant meadow in the woods next to the creek now, but no buildings left. One of the happy things they did when they got going here was they hired a man named Port Lawson as woods boss. Port Lawson's daughter says his education stopped around the 3rd grade, but the man was a genius. So it was his job. He supervised the haulers. They cut down a tree. The buckers would come in and cut it up into logs, and it was his job to get those logs on the railroad car on their way to the mill, and then it was the railroad boss's job. Port Lawson took this job on and set about to improve it. Remember, this is the late teens into the early 20s. Steam is a big thing now, and because it had been done with ox teams. That's out in Redwood Creek, Greenwood, Elk Creek, and that was how it had been done. We have the hillside, and you have the railroad at the bottom. You can do this. You see the man with the 2 buckets over his shoulder. He was a greaser, and he trot along ahead of the load, and there were logs set across the skid road, corduroy road, and he would wet those logs that came on just to reduce the friction, but not so much that it would overrun the oxen. That's bad. Not to get too technical, but it is bad. So that was how logging had been done right here in town. It had been done that way. The railroad cars are pulled in under the end of the brow logs there. That was a rollaway landing. And, it was somebody's job to knock those chocks out and then duck while the log rolled over them and onto the railroad car. Did I mention there was no OSHA? No, anyway, that's how it had been done early on. Well, by the time Lawson arrived on the scene, steam donkeys, Gold-ear donkey was on the scene, and they had quite a few of them. This is a real early one. You see that's a vertical spool, that steam-powered capstan there. It was made for rope, for manila rope. You take a quick loop of rope around it and catch it, and it would pull the log out. I suspect this one is actually only pulling them down to the bottom of the gulch, because I see this cable coming out the bottom. I think these logs are actually being skidded out by a larger donkey engine down the bottom of the gulch somewhere. Looks like a short-term setup. They can winch themselves along the ground, that's how they move. Or they can winch themselves onto a rail car and then be moved larger distances. I used to find 2 trails in the woods where the donkey shoes, the skids they were mounted on, it had been dragged along the ground. Somewhere along the way, Sam McCants was Wood's boss, and his daughter, Mabel, said that she remembered him sitting on the porch of their cabin at Camp 2 on Elk Creek, looking across at this steep rocky gulch and wondering how he was going to get the logs from there down onto the railroad car. It was just an awful job of yarding there. So he devised a flyer, but I think it was kind of a two-dimensional thing. I think it was only along its own center line. So you'd have to get logs down under it, and then you could fly them down to the railroad cars. But it was a big improvement over how it had been done. That's a sophisticated donkey engine there, big duplex. Looks like an expensive fishing reel. Got this fairly here to coil the cable back and forth on the rear spool. And the crew standing there proudly by their machine. Fairly long-term setup too, because there's a roof over it. Water was probably piped in for the boiler. Along comes Fort Lawson, and he realizes this logging this moving of logs is a three-dimensional game, and so this man with a fourth grade education came up with this system. This is a later version of it. He improvised and developed it further. So here's the donkey engine that ran the whole thing. 4 spar trees at the corner. And those darn spar trees could have been half a mile apart. This is a lot of big things. See the railroad going up there? That system could pick up a log anywhere between those 4 spar trees and land it directly on the railroad cars. And he figured the whole thing out in his head. Just astonishing. It's better than helicopter logging. It would actually be better than helicopter logging. Cheaper and everything else, except somebody has to drag those cables up the mountain. Let's look at the yarder system. It was a 8-drum system, and the drums were in pairs. I color-coded it for simplicity. Is that simple enough? So a man with a 3rd grade education devised this, but it's bewildering. The red lines lift the load. So if I lift that log up somewhere else and I want to bring it toward me, then I've got to maintain tension on the red line. I've got to pull on the yellow lines and slack off on the green lines to make it come toward me. It was quite a ballet for the people running those drums. And oh, by the way, they couldn't see the log. They couldn't see the log from where they were. I'll show you that. This is the flyer in one of those 3 creeks out off Alder Creek. The big frame up over the top of it was collapsible. It would fold down on the railroad cars for transport. It was just there to get the blocks and the cables up out of the dirt and keep them from cutting people's heads off and stuff like that. That's a really big boiler. I make that boiler about 6 feet in diameter. And here's 2 cars of fuel oil for the boiler. This is a steam pump. There's a steam line run back here and running a steam pump fuel. I think the water for the boiler was probably piped in from a spring up on the hill or something like that. And this was a fairly long-term setup. They'd log out this whole thing, log out maybe 160 acres or something like that for one setup. Amazing.
You couldn't see the log.
Yeah, I'll show you.
Okay, backing up on that. No radio.
They had telephone. I'll show you. Very next slide.
You didn't use the telephone.
A telephone talker. So the telephone talker, that's the telephone block right there, batteries in it. He's talking to the guy back on the yarder, and he's guiding the log down. But then whoever hooks up the chokers and this log, at first they can't see this guy or the other.
No.
So they have whistle pumps, just like later on. Then whistle signals for him to take it up and move it and all that kind of stuff. Really sophisticated, this is 20s, you know. That's just, that's a remarkable invention, and it made the company tons of money. Goodyear Lumber Company helped him get a patent on it. There were all over the Pacific Northwest companies wanting to buy this system from him, and then something bad happened, and we'll talk about that very soon. Okay, so 1924, Lamont Rollins is split this time between Greenwood and Mississippi. Riding the train from San Francisco up to Cloverdale to catch a stage over here, and by chance, my grandfather was on a passenger on that train. They get to talking, and he's interested to learn that Grandpa used to run this company. So he's a little older now. I have his wedding picture earlier. Looked like a kid. But Rollins, on the spot, offered him the job of running this company, the California operations. By then, John Ross thought it was time for him to become an owner. He was looking at building or buying his own sawmill. So the Goodyears made it possible for him to acquire 25% of the Goodyear Redwood Lumber Company and come back and run the whole shebang. And this company, by that time, folks, this was a vertical monopoly. They owned the ground the trees grew on. They owned the crews that felled the trees. They owned the railroads that brought them to the mill. They owned the mill. They owned the lumberyard here. They owned the ships that hauled them to the Bay Area. They owned manufacturing plants in the Bay Area that made wooden pipe, barrels, tanks, windows, doors, shutters, all kinds of things like that out of Redwood products. It's a huge facility now. And probably everything but retail, everything. And so it was kind of a vertical monopoly. Well, John Ross at the time, his two kids were grown, gone. His daughter just graduated from the University of Nevada, Reno, and his son, Jack, my father, at UC Berkeley. And so he brings them and his son-in-law. So here's Grandpa Ross and his wife, and then next to him is his daughter and son-in-law, and then next to them is my father, the third house over there. Who's the last house there? Your house. My father and his first wife lived there. Happy times for Grandpa. He was very content. He was not going to know worse times there, though. By about this time, by the time Grandpa came back to the company, they decided they had timber in Upper Garcia River, and the railroad had already been built up over the Mountain View Road and just into the Garcia River watershed. And they decided that they weren't going to haul big redwood logs out of Garcia River, over the top of the Mountain View Road, down through Alder Creek, up over the pass into Elk Creek, and on into town. 40 miles on a locomotive that did maybe 15 miles an hour. So they weren't going to do that. They were going to do it some other way. So they decided to close out Alder Creek. So Greenwood's other airline pilot drew the job. This was Roy Mongovan running the Dinky. They were tasked with going out at the end of the track and pulling up the rails. Roy went on and retired as clipper captain for Pan Am. Anyway, they quickly converted the Dinky back to wood burner so that when they weren't doing anything else besides taking up rails, they could cut their own firewood for the boiler. They converted a crummy to a little kitchen and quarters for the cook that they hired, and another one for a little workshop and tool room kind of thing. And they started out there at the end of the track, and they get to a switch, they pull up those tracks. They missed one siding, that was Three Springs Street. The rails were still on the ground there when I was a kid. They missed it. They got past it and forgot it. Also out there, near there, they left a big stack of rails about that high, probably still in the woods. But they pulled up the rails, brought them back to town, and they're going to reuse them in Greenwood Creek. So, just have a look at our little town. This is, like I say, it's a time of great prosperity, and our town was pretty big. This is the L.A. White Mill, about 1890. It's still under construction, and there's only one boiler, so it's before 1894. Still under construction, but it's already sawing. And that all looks pretty fresh. That construction all looks pretty fresh. The Elk Cove Inn is there. That was the boss's house. That was built maybe even before the mill was built. They had a place to live, along with the cookhouse behind it, and the bunkhouses up on top of the bank. This is after 1906 and before 1910. I've become fairly good at dating these pictures. A lot bigger mill by this time. The company store number 2 has been built. There's still the old high log dump. Later on, they built a lower one down there. But, 1906, yes, that's another way you can tell. Before 1906, that wharf running down there was in cut bed, excavated in the rocks down that point. The 1906 earthquake, that caved in, and they built trestle across there. So if you see pictures with trestle work going down the bank like this, it's after 1906. All right, 1918, I date that one to a single year. Over on the far side, railroad bridge up above, but that's the Greenwood Creek Bridge for the Coast Road. And that opened in March 1918, and in the end of that summer, they tore down the cookhouse. So this is the summer of 1918, or early summer. I see the pond looks pretty full, so yeah. Notice now it's a single big stack on the right side. Rebuilt the mill a little bit. This is a great picture. I just recently acquired this one. I think this is the first firing of that new boiler. There's smoke coming out of it, but it's got no heat there. Yeah, you know. And then the middle stack there is running normally. That looks like a boiler stack, you know. So it was probably running for electricity, and I believe it was a test fire in that first boiler. This is looking up the west side of the street. Look down here to the street and look north. This is what you would have been seeing back then. A lot of buildings on the west side of the road there. Way down at the end, you can see the second company store and the cypress trees right behind it. Those used to be just north of the visitor center. There's a little cypress hedge there. Let's walk up where those people are and look back this way. And this is what we see. It's kind of the hotel district, including Larry's, Larry. There you are. Yeah. What was it? The
Toscana Hotel.
Yeah, Toscana. Okay. Yeah, I was just down there a little ways. Busy town, a lot going on. A little farther uptown, this is looking from Matson's water tower. Looking at that's the company store there, the hotel. In 1902, they put those dormers on the third floor. They put, I think it was probably 15 bedrooms and a linen closet or something up there. They were pretty cramped and pretty dark and everything, but and one stairway up. Across the street is company store number 2. This is company store number 1, and it used to sit right about here, well to the south of the present visitor center, which would sit right in this space right here. Big tall flagpole. There's a locomotive shop, and that's where all those wheels on the beach come from. They just roll stuff off the cliff when they're done with it. Big town, a lot going on. Farther uptown, there's the school. We saw that last night. In 1897, the voters voted 98 to 4 to build the new school in Greenwood instead of Cuffey, Cove. The handwriting was on the wall. They did that. So this school was built in 1898, and I was in the last graduating class of that 6th grade, 1956. Ran down those stairs, went home, and 2 weeks later, 4 weeks later, that building was no more. Warren Denton owned the Heritage House, bought that building, and had it dismantled for the lumber. So Howard Fry did the work, and David, my brother David, Howard Galletti, and Clifford Longfire were his laborers. They dismantled it from the top down. The whole town turned out to see the big chimney fall. Catholic Church had that steeple at the transept. That's been long gone. I never saw that. The style on the fence, I love that. There's cattle driven through town. Nobody ever remembers to close the gate, right? So we had styles over these fences. There was a concrete one that was built in 1911. I remember that one, and that's been bulldozed off. It's over there in the brush somewhere now.
Has the Mendocino pickets too, you see that?
Oh, yeah. There was a picket mill in the mill. There was all kinds of specific little departments in that mill. There was picket rooms and shingle. There was even shingle rooms in the big sawmill. What else? Okay, there was the first company store. There's that locomotive again, the Typhoon, early on. store on that side, company offices on this side, and telegraph office. Greenwood, this is, in those years, Greenwood had telegraph. The outside, there's store number 2. First manager there was, a lot roomier. First manager there was William Fuller, who was married to my great aunt Ruth. That's how my grandparents met, was her sister. I have William Fuller's watch fob. I bought it off eBay a couple years ago, and had a nice conversation with the guy who bought it. He bought it at an estate sale at Mrs. Fuller's daughter's estate. Bar looking uptown, and that was briefly the third company store. That's the hotel on the right, and looking up the street, that's the pedestrian bridge is right there. Is Lee Poo Gulch, or that Strawberry Gulch back then. A hospital house, you can see. So here's the deal. The second company store burned in December of 1929, and the mill shut down in January 1930, about a month later. There couldn't have been much business done in the store, but they had inventory left over in the warehouse back there. They moved everything over. Yeah, I don't think people were spending a lot of money. Anyway, that was the store, and when I was a kid, there was still merchandise on the shelves in that building. Well, bigger changes are coming along. This way.
Chuck?
Yeah.
Before we get there, what happened to the west side of town?
Different things. There was a big fire that burnt, destroyed several of the buildings. The company, I think maybe the company bought back the lot from, and the town shrunk. And the town shrunk starting here. So by the time, my earliest memories, there were no buildings on the west side. From Sherlin's house to the post office, there was nothing. Brushy lumberyard. Why the heck am I using a Chattanooga, Tennessee newspaper for this? I'll tell you why. For some reason, for 3 months before and 3 or 4 months after the stock market crashed, no Mendocino County or Sonoma County newspaper printed the words stock market. Newspaper search, negative. They did not mention it. But it happened, folks, and you'd think they'd have noticed. Yeah, so here we got a highly leveraged $3.5 million purchase price on this lumber company. They've been doing business for a few years. They've made some money. But Chicago bond market holds the big note. The difference between stocks and bonds, right? If you own some stocks, it might have a par value measured in thousandths of a cent. Bonds are worth the full amount, folks. The Chicago bondholders are watching this with great interest. My grandfather wrote in his a Pioneer Lumberman story, and I don't think that's in print anymore. You don't have it in the store. Yeah.
I just found that.
I've revised, I've come up with a new revision, a new edition of it, and it's ready to go to the press, so we'll talk about that. Anyway, he wrote that a $5,000 payment was due. That didn't sound like very much money to me, big lumber company. Says here, $50,000, this is right out of the Chicago newspaper, $50,000 payment. But there's two possibilities. One, whoever typed up his manuscript for him just left out a zero. That's pretty likely. Or, number two, there was a payment due in February of 29. Maybe they amortized that payment. Maybe they paid it out like in 10 equal payments of $5,000, and that was due. But there's another due February 1st, 1930, and you can't give away a piece of lumber. So either way, $50,000 was going to be due and payable, and they didn't have it. It just wasn't there. Construction just stopped everywhere in this country. You know, this wasn't the only place that was hit by any means. You couldn't give lumber away. It just for a while. They were unable to make the bond dividend, and the bondholders just took their money and went home. And that was it. They shut it down. 7 million board feet of old growth redwood in the yard, right there, drying in the yard. They can't give it away. $125 million of standing timber. And guess what? Only talking about the old growth redwood. Nobody cared about fir. Even pine this year is really cheap. 125 million board feet of redwood left. Remember the flyer, and it took the spar trees and everything like that? They'd get up so far in the gulch, they wouldn't set the rig up for the next one, and then they'd leave maybe 70, 80, 100 acres at the top of each gulch, untouched. that timber was still there. Last board was on January 1930, and there was a shipment out of this wharf in October of that year, and that was it. Like any other one industry town, Detroit for automobiles, Pittsburgh for steel, Steubenville for glass, it was hurt. This place was really hurt. But I gotta think, one thing I learned about reading everybody's memoirs and talking to all the old timers stuff is, maybe the man worked in the mill or on the railroad or in the woods. The family supplemented their own table. Everybody in town seemed to have a garden, or they had a little orchard, they had a milk cow, they had chickens. There's venison all over these hills, there's fishing off the rocks. I think people ate okay. I just don't think there's much money moving around. Gas money might have been a problem. Why was it? You were here. Well, John Ross had moved his son, Jack, around through the mill, through the woods and everything. Jack Ross, my father, learned rigging under Fort Lawson. He learned under some people who were really good at stuff. And he had injured his foot in the mill, ran through a gear in the mill, and spent a year on cane or crutches. Huh?
I thought he did that when he fell off the roof in Mendocino.
Oh, he probably re-injured it, but he ran his foot in gear right through a gear. Just like no machine guards. And 500 horsepower, really, really deceptive. 500 horsepower, single cylinder steam engine, turning a couple of 10-foot flywheels. Torque, you can't imagine. And it just spit his foot right out the other side. The next morning, a bunch of the bosses are down there looking at what can be done to improve the safety right there. One of them turned around and stuck his foot in a different gear. I found that in the newspaper and kind of amused me. Well, Jack Ross was a pretty capable young man by this point, and so the mill shut down. He went I think he separated with his first wife at this point. He went to Eureka, became a Richfield oil trooper. That's the Ross and Johnson oil truck there in Eureka in about 1931. And he did that, and he did okay. Matter of fact, picture him, he had a L29 Cord he was driving. He was probably doing okay. I'd love to have that car. Anyway, Warren Daniels was an old friend of his from Mendocino. They went through school together, and they drank together. And Warren Daniels had been with Mendocino Electric Lumber Company. He went to scrap iron business in a big way, and he did very, very well. And the two of them are going to write the next chapter in this town. So, yeah, they were lifelong friends, and they're both very competent men. I think maybe my father was a better businessman. Not necessarily. Warren was a really good technical man. Warren could do anything. So, yeah. John?
Yeah.
Elk Redwood Company. The Goodyear Redwood Company formed receiver corporations, but they were born $500,000 in debt. And nothing is going anywhere. The big mill is not going to be run again because the bondholders are still not satisfied, right? They didn't really get the terms of their bonds. They just got to take their money back. So John Ross mostly is here on the scene in full loss control mode, trying to prevent it from hemorrhaging any money. My father, Jack Ross, came down in 1934, maybe late 33, came down with a proposal to the Goodyear company where they could continue to log the timber owned by that company, use some of the resources. They didn't want to use the mill, and the bondholders wouldn't let them anyway, but they were able to use the railroad and a lot of the steam logging equipment and stuff like that. So they did. They formed Elk Redwood Products. Warren and George Daniels, Linton Knight, and Jack Ross were the big stockholders. There may have been a few other people who had a share or two in it. And they built a sawmill. This is up near the head of Greenwood Creek on Russian Gulch. The Greenwood Philo Road goes down the hill on the far side there. So Bloyd's are over here, Bronsolino's over this way. Nice little steam sawmill, circular saw, much smaller mill, much leaner, tighter operation than that giant steam mill down here at the creek. I see 3 boilers there as repurposed from a donkey engine. and it turned out to not be enough. This is one of those things I just love about history. One day in 1963, Sid Baker, who used to live in what's now the Harbor House, Sid Baker came down to talk to my brother Raymond down at Belfry, and Raymond wasn't home. So Sid's driving out, I'm standing out in front of my trailer, and Sid stops and talks to me. And Sid was a great friend of our father and our grandfather, and knew him forever. Sid tells me this story, and if he hadn't, we wouldn't know this, but they ran the number 4, the big shay up there. You see that pipe sticking out from the top of the steam dome? They ran that pipe and they plumbed this thing into the mill system, and now they have enough steam pressure to run the mill. There were rail fans and steam locomotive fans all over who had seen this photograph and wondered what the heck that pipe was about. If Sid Baker hadn't stopped to talk to me that day, we wouldn't know. That's just kind of cool. I love when stuff like that happens. By the way, when I was a kid, that number 4 plate on the nose of the boiler, I had that in my bedroom when I was a kid. The hotel burned, it melted. So here they are. This is the camp. This was originally Camp M for Goodyear. This is at the confluence of Russian Gulch and Greenwood Creek, which is at our back. There's a railroad trestle right there in front of us. That's my mom and my oldest brother John standing there, and second brother Raymond in her arms. This was chosen because the first place they were going to log, which is right up the gulch here, the logging equipment had been parked right here. The men who had run all that stuff were still around. They were still in town, and they were unemployed mostly. So, I mean, this was perfect. The camp had only been abandoned for 2 or 3 years, so most of the windows were still there, and the shingles were mostly still on the roof, that sort of stuff. Mom has told me a lot of stories about living here. They'd sold the Cord and had a 28 Buick they bought used, and they kept it parked at Bronzolinos, and she would get a little hand cart and put her babies on the cart and pull up to Bronzolino ranch, park the cart, go down for groceries, come back, bring them all back up. One day the cart ran away with her babies on it. She's hanging on the back of it, being dragged down the railroad. You might not, if you're really sharp-eyed, you might have seen the head frame of the Lawson Flyer standing right there. It was set up there at the time, and they used it some. So everything was there in place. They built that little sawmill, and they were in business. Now they're using the railroad backwards. They used to haul logs downstream to the mill. Now it's going to haul finished lumber down to the lumber yard in town to be shipped off the wharf. Or they also have a lumber truck and trailer.
That was about 35.
What's that?
That was about 35 a year.
Raymond was born in June of 34, so he would have been 90 just the other day. So that's, you judge by however big that baby is.
I'm gonna dad had to be 4 or 5 years old then.
Yeah. No. About 3. Yeah. Most of the equipment is parked nearby, and that's my mom and John Ross IV and Raymond Ross. They had an agreement with the Goodyear Redwood Lumber Company for everything but the mill. So they are going to use the railroad, at least the Greenwood Creek Railroad, but it's been abandoned for 3 years and it's kind of rough shape. They knew tractors would come along. They're dealing with the tail end of the steam industry, and diesel is coming. Well, Holt had merged with Best recently from Caterpillar Tractor Company. That stuff's coming along. So now they're going to haul lumber down the railroad, and the railroad had to be put in shape. Some of the bridges had to be rebuilt, so that's the Gibraltar Bridge, and you have to, and it's just across a rocky face. There's no creek below it. That bridge's good. I walked across it in '86, I think, and it since fell down, and there's hardly any left there. The timber's all went into the creek. It's kind of sad. But Warren Daniels was tasked with rebuilding it. You see a donkey engine over on the far end and a high line along there, slinging timbers out there. So Warren's son, Don, and I climbed up into that bridge back in '86 and got that picture. I thought that was pretty cool. In 1959, we rode up, a Jeep rode up along the old railroad right away with Warren Daniels, and he told us stories all the way up and all the way back, including we drove across that bridge. What's next? Yeah, there's some, they did use the wharf. And they also had trucks that would haul east to the valley, ship lumber out however they could. Yeah, I'll bet it was a superior quality. It was a nice new, brand new sawmill, it's all trued up, and there was great timber up there. This is a picture of one of the Vaughn family visiting from the Harbor House. Took this picture of Helen P. Drew coming back to town after about a 4 or 5 year absence. Well, it was great employment. All these people have been thrown out of work when the Goodyear mill shut down. All good local employment again. The country is actually starting to crawl back up out of the Great Depression slowly. All through 1935, by April 1936, the bane of sawmills everywhere, it burned. It burned to the ground. It burned to a fine ash, and that destroyed all the machinery in it. It does bad things to metal, and so that was it. There wasn't a penny left for insurance in this little operation, and a mill like that out in the woods, like, yeah. Machinery was destroyed, and it was over. 86 men thrown out of work in the bottom of the Depression. And Warren Daniels, I know Warren Daniels sold a Waco biplane, and my father sold the Cord and his half of that oil. They raised all the money they could to put it into this thing. Broke. It was over for them. And I'm only aware of one more steam sawmill being built in Mendocino County after this. It was kind of not happening anymore. When we were young and came here before they built the Danielson Rock Mill, many of the men here in town worked somewhere else. They maybe go over early Monday morning, go over to Cloverdale, work all week, and come back Friday night. It was there wasn't a lot of employment here in this town. So why can't we just fire it up again? If there's a demand for lumber again, why can't we just fire this whole thing up again? Well, Fish and Game came along when Elk Redwood Products was in business, asked them to remove the dam. Warren Daniels set charges in that into the dam and probably rattled the windows all over town, blew a big hole in the dam, and that's pretty much what it looked like when I was a little kid. Can remember it looking like that. Warren was back into the scrap business, and he and his brother George took the rails out of Greenwood Creek. That was, and again, I mentioned this last night, but it is said by historians, real historians, that Japan held off signing the tripartite pact with Hitler and Mussolini until November of 1940 because they were buying iron all over the Pacific Northwest. And so that got it all back to Pearl Harbor wasn't exactly too far from the truth. They built a giant navy from this. What else went wrong? Yeah, the mill was eventually burned. They cut that road down across the hill there, and they burned, I mentioned this last night, the timbers alone in that mill building, 406,000 board feet of old growth redwood timber, and they burned them to get out a few tons of scrap iron. That's just unimaginable today. That mill would be worth more than the whole company today. Just the mill, it's just the wood in it. Anyway, that's a couple of years later, and it's looking pretty sad. The pond is drained, stuff is growing back in and down here in the old pond. That mill ain't gonna run again. Warren and George Daniels moved the Lawson Flyers up to Rockport. I actually got to see one of them was set up over the pond. I actually got to see that working. And the other one was used out in the woods in Rockport, and we don't know what happened to either one of them. Machinery could still be there. A little rusty. 4th of July weekend, 1939. A couple of guys up from the Bay Area fishing off the end of the pier. They're staying at Sid Baker's little auto court. That's now the Harbor House. Well, you know this town in July. It was cold. They got cold out there. So they built a fire right on the wooden planking at the end of the wharf. My mother suggested alcohol may have been involved. Townspeople came in here and tore out a whole section of the wharf to create a fire break. Look at that wind, it's taking it right towards the town. Well, that was the end of the thing for the wharf. It burned that truss span there across the cave. What else happened? Oh yeah, the locomotive sat here in the yard, right across out here in the state park now. Sat there and waited for the scrapper's torch. June 1940, they all got cut up. And nature kind of does what nature does. That's kind of what the lumberyard looked like when I was a little kid. That looks familiar. Yeah, it's as brushy as it is today. That was the electric shop. The open building there is the hoisting works for the wharf. So the wharf ran down from there. There's a warehouse just to the right of it. I didn't know this, but the house here, which I lived in both those houses, that was the harbor master's house, kind of an honorary title, but one man was tasked with keeping track of the shipping and stuff like that. He could see the mooring points from that back of that house, and the top of the wharf is right there. This right here is about a 16-foot wooden railroad turntable, and there was at least a dozen of those out in the yard. At some point, they'd been turned up out of the ground so kids wouldn't get spinning them, you know, their fingers caught in them or something like that. But they were all over that lumberyard at the time. And the railroad fell apart. That was the one on the right, sort of what it looked like when I was a kid. We'd walk across those bridges up the creek. Flagship sank into the mud there on Rotten Row in Oakland Creek, 1947. The Helen P. Drew, and she was refloated, towed up to Martinez Beach, and whatever's left over probably rots in the mud there to this day. That was the end of it. I think she may have had a little scene, like she may have been set decoration in the movie Blood Alley, John Wayne movie Blood Alley. They came into a little place where there were some boats in the mud, and they scrapped them, and they took lumber for their boiler fires, and I think she may have been one of the ones in the picture. Our little town had 15 minutes of fame. It's very cool. I went to a Edward Weston photo exhibit at a museum in Reno a few years ago, and learned something. So, Edward Weston was probably the best-known photographer in this year. He and Ansel Adams and a few others formed that group F-64, and his best-known model was Charlotte Wilson. Her father was a well-known author. She's a little bit of a celebrity herself. And they came driving up the North Coast. He sees a sign for a photo studio, and he's a professional courtesy. He's got to stop in and talk to this local photographer. Turned out to be Charlie Walker and Daniel's father, some of you knew Ann. Father, in quotes, adopted father. When they learned that he was the Justice of the Peace, he was Judge Walker, they drove over to Ukiah, got a marriage license, and came back over, and Charlie Walker married them. Kind of cool. Before he left town, he took this picture, and that's the photo I saw. I said, well, I know what that is. That's just way cool. That looks like it's squeezed a little bit to me, but oh well. The steeple is a little sharper back then. That was replaced. Your dad probably did some of the work. Yours, I mean, the town can put that little blunt roof on the steeple in about 1950 or so. Trees are still growing, folks. America's coming up out of the Great Depression, worldwide depression actually, and we're all coming out of it. That is what the crown of an old growth redwood looks like. That is an outlaw tree up on the ridge. I call the bear trap tree, and it's burned out. It's hollow, but it's also protected. Any tree that was growing when California became a state, 1850, is protected. And oh, by the way, there are no mills that would have a log that size anymore anyway, so they're doubly protected. Well, so what's going to happen? They closed out Elk Redwood Products, and Duesenberry family, Olean, New York, was running Rockport, and they asked my grandpa to take it over, and he said, no, you want my son, Jack. So my father went to Rockport and ran that mill for a few years. My sister was born when they were living in Fort Bragg, and one of my brothers. Yeah, in 41 they went to Willis. He built a big mill for Sage Land and Improvement Company out on where Chris Baldo's yard is on west side of Willis. And reunited there with with Warren Daniels. Warren, in addition to being a scrap iron business, he's a pretty capable lumberman, and I find his name in association with just about every mill up and down the coast at one time or another. Warren was a pretty sharp boy. So they get back together, they formed Daniels and Ross Lumber Company. First office was in the Van Hotel on Willits, and then they built an office right down the west end of Commercial Street. It's a real estate office, it's Creekside Realty or something like that now. That was Daniels and Ross World Headquarters. Their mill was out on Redwood Creek, Upper Noyo, out near Irmoco. They built this mill. They sawed only redwood. The Douglas fir they did cut, got loaded onto rail cars and sent to Willits to another mill. That was a pretty good little operation. My sister and I both remember that mill. I was pretty young, but I remember it. Meanwhile, over here, there is still a lumber business, and people are still trying to make a living, trying to support themselves and stuff like that. So, mom and pop operations, there were many. I'm going to show you some of the mills I remember, or I know about, and there's a couple of the big mainline mills, like the White Mill will show up here, but this is just a little illustration of what it was like. As soon as I press the next button. Helmke Mill, there was maybe one in Laurel Gulch. There was a few mills here, small. Some of them might have had a single saw, or maybe a single circular saw and a little edger. Many of them never even had a building erected over the top of them. And maybe they ran for a little while, and I doubt that there's very much remaining of any of those, but Maycrest and Fair Hipsley were on the same site. There's at the bottom of the hill there before you go out on the Devere River Bridge, there's an old mill pond just on the upstream side. That was, both those mills used it. Yeah, so there was a lot going on, but it was all small scale stuff. Well, World War II comes along. Lumber, like any other commodity, is suddenly huge demand. The War Department is buying trainloads of it, but it's also draining the labor market, it's drafting men. This is the era where you see pictures of women working in sawmills, which just was unheard of a generation before. War is won by 1945, and the War Department, to offset some of its losses, starts selling surplus equipment. Every little town in America has an Army surplus store. Just this stuff. Those tires, that's that Army issue mud lug tire. Every truck I ever saw when I was a little kid had those darn tires on. That is an old white 10-wheel drive gasoline-powered truck. It was out of Redwood Creek. Daniels and Ross truck. They had two of them like it. Those both wound up here. One of them had a power shovel, a dipper stick, steam shovel mounted on the back of it. You know, it was converted to a dump truck, and they rocked the yard here, and they rocked the logging roads. Never used it for logging again, but that was here. Well, some further change is coming along. The war is over. Warren Daniels and Jack Ross, partners from long ago, are in business together, and they are both looking at help. The former Ellie White holdings up here are now, by this time, owned by Callion Beacon. The trees are growing out there, folks. It's been 60, 70 years since some of them were felled. There's big second growth out there. And both these men have their eye on that. Well, Jack Ross was killed in Willits in 1950, and Warren Daniels bought out his share from my mother, and we still had this property here in Elk, about 300 acres or so, including the old hotel. We moved into that. Warren Daniels paid her off. My mom thinks he didn't pay her quite enough, but she accepted it, and there we are. But history will repeat itself. 1952, he came over and signed a lease with my mother to build a sawmill on her land right across the road here, and Daniels and Ross Lumber Company was coming to town. At this time, Warren came to me. I was, 6 years old, 7, 8 years old. Came to me and said, Matson's owned some land on the west side of the highway. Have you ever been playing around the brush over there and found stakes in the ground? I said, oh yeah, I'll show you. So I took him over across from your garage and showed him the property corners. Warren Daniels came to town and built a sawmill. This is a composite photo I put together from about 5 or 6 frames of 8mm movie of the mill under construction. So that big assembly there is a Swedish gang saws. A rack of saws goes up and down about 300 strokes a minute. The whole log passes through that in one single pass, and then it goes on down to the edge or become boards. It was going to operate for those two diesel generators there. That foundation is still in the ground. It's covered in brush and it's all crumbled and everything, but it's still there, right across the road. I think that's Joe Conway climbing over the wire up there. First thing they did was build that shop right across from Max's garage, and then they started building the mill in the background. This is many frames of 8mm movie. And they're already starting to deck logs here in anticipation. I'll walk you through that mill, just kind of how it all came about. So we recognize that, right? We're right over there. And we'll start with this little depression in the ground there, that big scooped out place there in the ground. If you walk down to the beach and you turn right instead of left, it'll take you down to this circular concrete ring. A while back I read a really learned dissertation on the internet about how that was a coastal artillery battery. My brother Raymond helped pour the concrete that was, of course, the foundation for the burn. 60 feet wide, 70 feet high. And you see it's already crumpling from the heat. They had to reinforce it on the outside. It was going to collapse. That fire was hot. That wind blowing 5,000 miles across the Pacific Ocean, right in those scoops at the bottom of this thing. That fire was cooking. So that's where they built that. I'll build the mill for you. They built the shop first. It was right about there. And a contractor built the burner. That's a specialized thing. They tapered sheets and stuff like that. But they built the mill right there. That's just about what it looked like, green chain coming out this side. And then, almost immediately after it was running, they put in the planing mill and planers to finish. Surface lumber was always easier to sell than drum. Right behind the burner, the next thing was they added the south side. That gang saw would only take up to a 36-inch log. So if they had bigger logs, they would run them through the south side. It was a double circular head rig, and they would cut these slabs up. They would square it up at 36 inches on a side. It's called flitches. And they would stack those flitches, and they'd feed the flitches into the gang saw, and there's no waste at all from that, because this is a 36-inch square thing going through the saw. So that was the south side. Later on, they added a resaw out at the end, and the last thing they did here was they built this steam-heated drying kiln. Two 6-foot gauge railways led straight through the building. The cars, you just put these set of wheels there, a set of wheels, and a timber across it, and you stack the lumber on it, the lumber became the rail car. And when the train was built up, it was the open doors were open, it was pushed inside, doors were closed up. Steam with heat would cook the moisture out of it, and was ready to build it. You had another train built, you push it in, and that would push the first one out, and it was dismantled on the other side. My brother Jim and Percy Daniels were instructed by Warren Daniels how to build railroads, and they laid those tracks. So either my brother Jim or Percy Daniels had the distinction of driving the last railroad by Greenwood. That was 1959. We went in that building one night, one cold, foggy night, went in the man door through the big doors there, climbed up in the end of the lumber pile, went to the far end, climbed down the other end, went over into the control room, and that's the small building, the boiler room, and it was 180 degrees and 100% humidity. We thermal shocked when we walked back out into the fog, I'll tell you. This is a 1953 or thereabouts photograph of it. I love this. This is a picture of my early childhood. We lived in the big hotel down here. The third-story wing is being torn down now, dismantled board by board. And yeah, the only building in this photograph, the only building left is the visitor center. Yeah, that's it. That was a little fire station, had a hand-drawn hose cart in it. Somebody took that one day, I don't know where it went. Yeah. Oh, the little pile of lumber down there. I think this is kind of cute. This pile of lumber right here wasn't cut locally. That was purchased from outside by Elk Redwood Products to build their mill. And the men were all out of camp. My mother was here in town with her babies, and the truck driver shows up. There's nobody to unload it. There's no machinery to unload it. So there was roads out around the lumber yard then. He stops out there, takes the wrappers off the load, tears around the corner of the lumber hall, rolls off. And my mom sat there with her babies in the blackberry bushes and stacked that lumber over the next few days. Just tickled me. Story. Yeah, that's, oh, by the way, that is a 12,000 gallon diesel tank. It's still buried on State Park, and they don't know where it is. So Daniels and Ross got going. They had Warren had run the railroad here before. He run locomotives on this railroad. So they built road up, down, under the Greenwood Creek Bridge and up to where the Fred Helmke sawmill had sat. That was their first load, our first landing. So let's just follow one load of logs. My brother Raymond was driving this truck in the mid-50s. 305 horsepower Hall Scott butane engine. He loved that truck. He got prosperous, he bought it. This is Elmer Galletti, his D7 cat, was one of the loggers out there, and his choker setter was Mike Canello's. There's lunch on the landing. Up Greenwood Creek, we're looking across at the Greenwood Ridge side. On the left is Reese Berry, and then there's Reek, Howard, and Elmer Galletti, and with attached to the picture, Johnny Equistapatch. And the Archie credit card right there on top of the wheel. Wow. Logs were loaded there with a Skagit heel boom log loader, and I got behind that thing on a logging road one day, and I just had to shut down and walk around for 10 minutes and then drive up another 100 feet. It was slow. Here they are coming under the Greenwood Creek Bridge, the later bridge, the concrete bridge. That's Percy Daniels, Warren's son, on the right, and Tom McFarland on the left. Tom is now a retired Army major helicopter pilot living in Georgia. Yeah, unloading Freddie Costega on the Michigan loader, unloading that load of logs right here in the mill, right just about the back end of the parking lot, the present parking lot. And so from there, they actually went a little farther out and up the side of the Creek logging some crowfoot timber, and I think they poached a little of my mother's timber coming down this way, maybe, allegedly. They built the road up over the ranch into Elk Creek, and they logged out a bunch of Galletti timber. In about 1959, they punched a Jeep road up the railroad, all the way up to Maple Basin Road, and you could drive all the way up. I got to ride over that road with Donnie Daniels and I, and with Warren, and he told us stories all the way up, all the way back down. Those stories would make a great presentation. I get some pictures to go with them. When I was about 18 years old, I helped build that little road over to the last sawmill there. I helped with the blasting. It's a really steep, rocky canyon there. So, what's going on? This is Daniels and Ross. Oh gosh, I'd say about 1959 or so. That's one of their blue Peterbilt over the highway lumber trucks. There's the visitor center in the background, and the white house up in the corner, that's the Michael Donahue place, 1858 ranch. That's the oldest house in town. Just a lot going on there. This is the mill from the south side, so the State Park parking lot would be right where that little log deck is out. You see where the burner is, you know where that ring is in the ground, then the outhouse would be right over here at this slash pile there. This was the mill from the south side. This was actually 2 or 3 Polaroids in terrible shape. I've cleaned this picture up a lot. Looking up inside the burner, artistic shot. Looking down the throat of the gang saw, that's Joe Conway. I mentioned last night that Cuffey Cove was an Irish town. Conways were just one of the families, Agnew, Donahue, Kenny, Kimball. A lot of Irish. Joe Conway was one of the last of them. From the roof of the drying kiln, looking uptown, the downtown business district in our little town. This is the picture that you had. Right. This is October 13th, 1955. So I guess I was in school here. I was on the street, and this is a photograph of my childhood. I could have done a 2-hour talk on this picture alone. But we lived there in that hotel. That's my brother's '55 Dodge. There's my brother Raymond is standing there by the Sterling log truck. Brother John's pickup is over there. Red Hopkins' pickup is there. This is just But in October, look at this big mud puddle over here, between the log decks. Yeah, Evelyn Baldexy is coming through the gate right there. That's just, I love this picture. Warren Daniels hired Western Ways aerial photography out of Corvallis, Oregon, and they took, we got 2 of the prints. I have 2 of the original 11 by 14 prints. There's just so much information in those photographs. And so I was sitting reserve with the airline. They're paying me to sit by the telephone and wait to be called into work. And I mean, I did that for a couple of months back in Charlotte, North Carolina. I colorized these pictures while I was on company time. Thank you, U.S. Airways. And notice that this house right here is up next to the road. It now sits down here. Warren Daniels was a little bit of a poacher. Without even asking my mother's permission, he moved that house over onto her property. So I think we may have a little claim to that piece of land right there. Sorry, State Park.
I don't think that's ours.
At the very least, everybody at the time. This is from around the other side, same day. And this time they caught Warren Daniels in his blue Chrysler station wagon, just leaving the log yard. You can see quite a bit of the warp coming down the side of it, quite a bit of timber and planking still in place. And you hear a lot about industrial pollution, right? So here's industrial pollution, folks. This is Daniels Ross Lumber Company. There's the Daniels home, and here's the Ross home. We're eating it. You know, we're putting up with it. Actually, I think that constant rain of sawdust from that burner didn't get burned all over town. I think that's the reason it's such good gardens in this part of town. There's a lot of sawdust down here, folks.
What's the Greenwood 2 buildings?
Oh, these right here? Those were old Ellie White Lumber Company housing, and my mom owned these 4 houses. So when this hotel burned, we moved into these 2 out here, and these were rented out. This one, $35 a month. Oceanfront cottage, right? $35 a month my mom charged for it. And Clay Sweeney left town owing my mother $410 in back print. My mom was not a business person.
Didn't Eddie McKenzie's family live in one of those houses?
What's that?
Didn't Eddie McKenzie's family live in one of those houses?
Probably before my time, yeah. The
Yeah.
Jensens who owned the Greenwood Creamery lived in this one for a long time. That's the locomotive shop right there, the old locomotive shop. There's a little railroad trestle across the top of that little gully there, and that was like a wooden pit that they could get the locomotives out over that and they could work up under them. And like I said, when they pulled a part off the locomotive, they just rolled it off the cliff. And this beach right down here, there's probably a 10-foot deep layer of scrap iron down there that's buried under the sand. I've seen it uncovered once. Yeah, that's, go ahead.
Look at the deck of logs.
Yeah, oh yeah, and down at the old mill site down the creek, up at the upper pond, upstream from the Greenwood Creek Bridge, they had another, I would say, 8-10 acre rock, and they had logs stored there at various times. This log deck sat here for a long, long time. We used to play hide and seek in there. So the only houses that are, this is still there, that house is still there, and that one. Well, Warren Daniels died in 1960, and it's going to change things. Warren Daniels, him with the welding goggles on, he was building the mill at the time that picture was taken. Well, Daniels Ross had a junior partner named Glenn Wyford, the Noyo storekeep, and he was kind of, I would dismissive to call him the bean counter, but his specialty was just really general stuff. I don't think he was all that much of a lumberman. He wasn't interested in running a sawmill anymore. I think he was as old as Warren. So he's getting ready to retire. So he sells the mill to Al Thrasher from Ukiah. Al Thrasher had he had a sawmill over in Calpella, where I later worked, was almost a laboratory. It was a really modern mill, really fine curved saws and stuff like that. Al Thrasher was a very successful man. He bought Elkville Lumber Company, and if anybody in this room knew Glenn Weichert, he sold him only the mill, he kept the land, so he charged rent. You can either move your mill or pay me rent. That was Glenn Weichert. So now it's running. Now the same mill is running. And my brother John, I think, worked there for the whole history of that mill. It was run the cutoff saw there over the pond by this.
Yeah, I remember, coming down there and we wanted to load a firewood, so we just pulled them inside and they said all the saws at 16 inches. Clear 2x4s coming out and just go in and pick up the burn.
Yeah, I never heard of paying for firewood.
Never heard.
We used to take the company dump truck, that white dump truck, and park it under the conveyor when they were cutting Douglas fir, and Georgie Kirk was the trimmerman, and he would drop all the saws of this pitchy stuff, and we'd just fill up that truck with really pitchy Douglas fir 2x6s and haul it home and dump it.
Oh, 4x4s, you think was coming?
Yeah. Well, the next timber operators, next timber operators, I'm going to kind of talk about as kind of lump them all together, because there was a great connection here between them. Yeah, Al Thrasher's running Elk Cove Lumber Company. He renamed it that, Elk Cove Lumber Company. And Beacon and Ross go into business, and we'll look at them and the two subsidiaries, sort of. That was R.D. Beacon on the right there, and R.H. Ross, my brother. The backstory is about 1962 or so. Bobby's about 21 years old or so. His father wants to get him established in life. He's afraid he's a little inexperienced and naive maybe and might get taken advantage of. Italian Beacon really liked their brother Ray. A lot of respect for him. So he said, if you two will form a partnership, you can log the ranch, pay me stumpage, and you guys can log ranch. They're in business. That was just a good deal for both of them. Shortly thereafter, Bob Sanders and Harold Trimble came up and offered them a deal. So Bobby says, we'll build a sawmill. We will build a sawmill on your land. We'll pay you rent. We'll buy logs from you. And when the contract is up, you'll own the sawmill. What could go wrong? That was a great deal. Bob Sanders went on to become probably the last true timber baron. He owned a dozen sawmills in Oregon and Washington. He offered me a job late in his career, flying his Citation 10 jet. But I was already with the airline. I wasn't going to go do that. This is the Sanders and Trimble mill. I worked there for about a year and a half. I wish I had sense enough to make a true panorama out of it at the time, but anyway, that was a little stud mill. They cut nothing but 8-foot 2x4 wall studs.
Fir or redwood?
Was it fir or both, but all second growth. The last player in this whole thing was Darwin Christensen. He's got to be considered with them. Darwin, my brother-in-law, Darwin was an old logger. He told me once his first job was whistle pump, making the signals to a yarder. I think maybe at the head of Brush Creek or maybe up on the Garcia or something like that. But he was really well known for his fleet of trucks. He hauled into Bochock there in Irish Beach, Spacek at Malpass, Hollow Tree out on the Garcia, Walla with a W, Diamantine on top of Brush Creek, and even his own little mill. He built his mill, never built a structure over it, but he built his own little mill down here at Bridgeport, right out on the bluff. Operated that for a time. I think I cost the auction for that. Yeah.
Is that Christensen from Bridgeport here?
Yeah.
Martin, yeah,
Yeah.
Martin's son.
Martin Christensen's land at the time, out there by the ocean.
Both sides of the road.
What?
That was his both sides.
Okay. Well, yeah, so Beacon and Ross was formed to log off Greenwood Ranch. You look at this 62, some of that stuff had not been, some of that acreage had not been logged for 80 years. The second growth was really thick, really big, and they had the deal. So 30,000 acres is what Beacon's holdings were at the time, roughly. So they bought a little bit of gear. They bought a Homelite 909G saw. Don't ask me how I know that. And we went out to Hawkins Gulch in North Fork. Actually, it was Plain Wreck Gulch and North Fork. And the first tree they fell, I was standing there watching it. Great big second growth, and they just started making money right from the start. They Buster Stanley and Cliff Comer came over from Willett bringing some gear. Buster Stanley brought a bunch of old rusty junk from 100 years ago. Cliff Comer brought a couple of trucks that were actually useful. They logged up the North Fork of Elk Creek, and the ridge off to the right, between them and the main channel, was just covered with this tall, straight, slender Douglas fir second growth, and that was the good deal. Worth much more as poles for creosoting plant than it would have been as saw timber. That looked like a fairly long load. That truck and trailer were modified. It was 45 feet between the bunks on this thing, and look at the overhang. That's another 45 feet. Overall, 135-foot vehicle length, took a pilot car, and they may have taken down the Black Point cutoff sign there on Highway 101 in Montgomery County, or I might be making that up. Those logs would swing way out on the corner. Yeah, so any new roads they built had to be modified. This is the old Daniels Ross Hall Road down into Elk Creek, and you can't tell, but those logs are going to drag on the bank all the way around that corner.
So what did they do with those long poles?
Took two creosoting plants, they became telephone poles and pilings. Yeah, it just worth so much more than just sawing them up into, they're not that big, you know. And that, because of the length, they got to the weight limit just about the top of the stake, so this is a low center of gravity on this load. That truck would go like a bat out of hell on the highway. That was just, that was a good deal for them. Beacon to Ross started out with a really good concept. 30,000 acres, all one holding. What they're going to do is just take the time, they're just going to log it a season at a time. They're going to put in permanent roads. Of course, they'll make maintenance. They're going to put permanent roads, good culverts, and stuff like that. And they're going to do selective logging or sustained yield logging. They're going to take, let's say they take every tree down to 24 inches. Well, the big ones are 50, 60 inches. They're going to take everything down to maybe 24, maybe down to 30. By the time they've logged their way the 30 miles to the back end of the ranch, they can start over at the front, and they will never reduce their inventory. And it won't be as destructive to the woods and everything like that. This is after they logged that spot, folks. This is out on the North Fork of Elk Creek. That's what they left standing when they logged it. So this spot, this acre of land right here, has been logged 2 or 3 times since then, and it's ready to harvest it again. What happens? You take the big trees out, you let sunlight in. So stuff starts growing. These trees no longer have to reach for the sunlight; they start growing thick instead of tall. And I mean, it was a good concept. What went wrong? Well, we'll get there. The next really big thing, the big cash cow for this company, was the Doherty claim. This is a newspaper clipping here. Mrs. Kate Doherty, Catherine Donahue, daughter of the Michael and Catherine Donahue, 1858 rancher here. She's married to Will Doherty. She acquired this land, and actually that's only half of it. I think the next quarter section to the left of it was the other part, because it was 160 acres, and that's only shows 80. It never was logged. It was never logged. There's old growth. It would be a state park today, or if it was still there. It had never been logged. Giant old growth redwood all over up there, and one log loads like this were just
Wait a minute. That's my old logging truck.
Is it? That was Darwin Christensen's at the time. That's my brother Raymond. The truck is bigger than it looks. Raymond was 6'4" and 320 pounds. But I think that was the logs he hauled to San Diego for his accountant. They hauled it down to San Diego on a street up on Mount Soledad in La Jolla, rolled it off on the street, and cut it up into rounds, and the guy set them as steps up to his house, from the sidewalk up to his house. It's still there. He got on the local news that night, and Regis Philbin called him up and had him on his show after that. That was just kind of this Paul Bunyan logger kind of a story. But load after load like that. In fact, I got a picture, an earlier picture of Darwin with a half log load.
I still have the grill out of that truck, you know.
Oh, that?
Who did you buy the truck from?
Bobby Beacon.
Okay.
I bought it from him. In
I-
pieces.
I think I know a couple of the steps in between you buying it from him and he buying it from Darwin, but
And Chuck, we got about 5 minutes, but I mean, obviously.
oh, we're almost done.
Okay.
We're almost at the end of the line, yeah. All right, so they built logging roads eventually. You could haul logs from right next to the Mountain View Road, just out past Piper Ranch, all the way to the middle here in Greenwood without rolling a tire on pavement. It was all off-road, and mostly followed the old railroad right away. This is a landing out at Camp 1 on Elk Creek, so this is the old railroad grade right here. And there were, of course, loading logs right in the creek. You don't do that anymore. Greenwood Lumber Mill, underway. My brother David was a building contractor in the Bay Area, and he referred to our lumber as skis, barrel staves, and airplane propellers. It was all so quiet. Harold Trimble bought his sawmills by the time. He would buy scrap iron and turn it into a mill. So this is what the place all looked like as of the time I moved here. Darwin, Arnold, Michigan, out there at Elk Creek. Fleet of trucks down there at the old home ranch, plus the Beacon and Ross Peterbilt. Yeah, this is exactly what it looked like when I left town. Percy Daniels coming up out of Elk Creek with Darwin. I took this picture, my very first flying lesson, September 1964, and fun fact, that was closer to the Wright brothers' first flight than it is to today. I've been a pilot more than half the life of the airplane. How could that happen? Anyway, I took that picture. This is the intersection of my two lives right there, the airplane and the sawmill. Well, sometimes when things go bad, they just go back and bad in a lot of different directions. I'm going to show you 3 or 4 pictures here that have absolutely nothing to do with what went wrong. The story of what went wrong is a really personal story. I always regard this breakup as almost like a divorce. A lot of hard feelings to the end of people's lives. A lot of hard feelings, and some things really went very wrong. But in particular, there's one person whose name I have not mentioned, and I'm not going to mention, that probably played a huge role in breaking up a couple of friendships and ending this stuff. So things go wrong, and Darwin pulled the tracks off his Bob Ryan. Yeah, shortened the cab a little bit.
Oh my God.
The guy wasn't hurt, he jumped out. That was Clydo. Jumped out, and the Cliff Comer's mat went away. Yeah, things go wrong. All of which had nothing to do with what's coming next. It starts falling apart at every seam here. First off, Al Thrasher owned Elk Cove Lumber Company. He went through a thermonuclear divorce. It was ugly. And I've known airline captains that have better divorces, and they don't generally do well. Elk Cove Lumber Company, it turns out, it appears that Al Thrasher had Elk Cove Lumber Company in his wife's name. She didn't know it, but she had a divorce attorney. So it got found out. She's wanting to claim the whole thing, since it's already in her name, as a separate thing from the divorce settlement. She wants the whole thing here. He set out to prove that it was a liability and not an asset, and that it was not an economically viable company without his massive infusions of money. All the employees, I know your dad signed that, there was a petition, all the employees of Elk Cove Lumber Company signed a document stating that it was a viable company and it was perfectly capable of running on forever. But it got wrangled out in court. The judge did what judges do everywhere, ordered it into receivership, shut down Elk Cove Lumber Company, and that was it. And the bill got shut down, and that was the end of it. The Beacon and Ross, the Sanders and Trimble, and the Darwin Christensen divorce happened separately, but along about the same time. So here's a newspaper notice. Here's Darwin Christensen suing Beacon and Ross et al. Here is Bob Sanders suing Beacon and Ross et al. Here's my personal favorite. This is Robert C. Sanders and Harold Trimble, partners, doing business as Sanders and Trimble, a partnership, plaintiffs, versus Beacon and Ross, Callion Beacon, R.D. Beacon, R.H. Ross, Greenwood Branch Company, Greenwood Timber Company, Greenwood Land and Cattle Company, Darwin Christensen, and those 1 to 10 inclusive. You were nothing in this town if you weren't being sued at this time. It does sort of suggest, though, there was maybe some hard feelings and maybe some contractual commitments that somebody didn't feel had been met. Yeah, that's a fair statement. Amidst all this, Callion Beacon died. I like old Callion, and his story has got to be a presentation here one day, because it's an interesting story. Callion Beacon died. Son Bobby is now really disillusioned with the lumber business, and probably doesn't feel like he wants to run a lumber company himself. He starts selling off big parcels back there that had already been logged off. Big outside corporations, out-of-state corporations, bought them, and they're content to sit back and let the trees grow for 50 years. And Bobby's not going to make any revenue on those, but he's at least he's out of the lumber business. Al Thrasher shut down, dismantled, and auctioned off this mill, and allegedly did it so as to minimize the profits from the auction sale. That has been alleged, and so that happened. That was June 6, 1967. I was on a training flight in the airplane that I was flying in Vietnam. I'd have rather been there than here.
My dad bought the head rig out of that.
Is that right?
Global.
Ah, the gangs are the double circular.
The double circuit.
Okay, yeah. I wonder what became of that.
Sitting not good still.
Greenwood Lumber, shortly thereafter, the following year, shuts down and gets dismantled. Bob Sanders, like I said, went to Oregon, became a true timber baron. In fact, Oregon State University, the women's athletic field is the Jane Sanders Stadium. He donated that. It did well. Harold Trimble went to Cloverdale and did Harold Trimble things for the rest of his life. And he did okay, though. Darwin kind of didn't want to be a principal in the timber business much anymore. There's just easier ways to make a decent living. Darwin was a very talented cat skinner, and I think that's mostly what he did up there. Yeah. And so he did some logging in the Sierra, and then he did a lot of cat skinning at quarries. And so that was pretty much what he did for the rest of his life. Deacon and Ross split up. Our brother Raymond left the coast forever. He'd come back to visit every now and then, but that friendship had soured seriously. And Bobby did Bobby Beacon things. He had a couple of bars, a couple of restaurants, ran for sheriff, ran for school boards, a radio communications business, yeah. So Bobby said, and he gave me a bottle of wine last night. And it all started falling apart. So when that building fell down, my memories became homeless. Worked right in that spot for about a year. And the relics still lay around, stuff to be found. There's the former world headquarters of 4 different lumber companies. Visitor center now. That's pretty cool. I'm glad it's going to be preserved and maintained. And like I say, the relics lay around in the woods everywhere. The old railroad wheel up Greenwood Creek. That was from that slide, that 1882 slide, took out the railroad track. Last cabin, Camp 11. Thank you, Gene Piper, for steering me to that. That was very cool. I found that a few years ago above Alder Creek. A flywheel off a donkey engine, Murray Brothers donkey engine. There's the old company safe out of Camp 11, still laying in the weeds out there. Looking back, my drone, looking back along the wharf, I see that one pilot is so technically leaning way over at a crazy angle. I give it another year at most. And I didn't fly in a drone over state parks.
I know.
We had that conversation last night. Old James Kenny shoot up at Cuffey, Cove, that's one of the 4 that I know of. The old flume used to bring water to town for free, powered by nothing but gravity. It was full of water crickets, with no off wooden flumes. That is a Shea locomotive brake shoe out in Alder Creek, and next time I'm out there, I will measure the radius of that and figure out which locomotive it was from, because I have builder's sheets for them. The old horseshoe bridge, ever more natural shape. You just round them off. There's the old pilings from the old log dump, right below the Greenwood Creek Bridge, it's just down the street. Camp M out there on, River Creek, Greenwood Creek. These trestles just, those timbers are just pumped, now you just crunch them in your hand, just stuff like that. I still get out in the woods wherever I can, look at whatever relics are there, speaking of old relics, there I am, I'm Greenwood Creek. A lot of stuff to be seen out there. MRC is the big game in town now, and they've been very good to me, so I have to speak kindly of them. They allow me to trespass all over their land, anywhere I want to go and stuff like that. And they've been careful with what relics they find for the most part. We put the Hellcat tail back in place.
Yeah, we put that.
Yeah.
Found an old airplane.
I think they're doing a pretty good job, but gosh, the principal in that is an old man.
Yeah.
When I call somebody an old man. Trees are growing, folks. I've got Bishop Gold's looking down into Elk Creek, and who's gonna write the next chapter? You know, the timber's growing, there will be a demand for lumber one way or another. It's sure gonna look different than it used to. And that's all I got, guys. Any questions?